I've set my boat up here between the shop and the garage where I get a little bit of a wind tunnel effect, because I'd like to show you a little bit about initial tuning before pond side tuning, say, for best speed for the Victoria. So I check my shroud tension. It's a little loose. I'm going to tighten it up a little bit. Many skippers worry quite a bit about keeping the mast strictly vertical. You can do that by checking the dimensions on both sides with a tape. Some make what amount to wooden dividers so that they can see that it's upright. Okay, it's pretty tight now. And that it's got a slight, my shrouds are slightly aft, which pulls back on this part of the mast, which helps take some of the bow out that's induced by the difference between the tension in the forestay and the backstay. They don't meet up at the top of the mast in the same location. And that tends to put a bow in the same in the mast. The shrouds here aft tend to straighten it out just a little. Okay, next we check the curvature of the sail at the foot. That's about right. The wind's a little bit light now. I think I'm going to open it up just a touch here. 2 fingers is probably too much. 1 finger is not enough. That's pretty close to right. Now the jib, it's more like 8 finger. This is a little more than I'd use for average air, but this is a little bit light right now, so I'm going to stick with that. Now we check where the boom comes to. As a starting point, we want to come right, have the end of the boom point right across this break in the shear line. It pretty much does. I'm going to slack it just a tiny bit. We want the jib pointing just inside the shrouds, or a little more than 2 fingers gap between the boom and the mast. Now these settings, you may want to change them for speed. You play around to get the best speed. This is just to get you started at the pond. Now let's talk about the twist, which is controlled by the vang down here. I've got a little bit of opening here, which maybe I'll bring that down just a little. And tighten the vang just a touch. I'm going to go about a half turn. That's looking pretty good. Now let's see if we pull on the halyard. If you can see this, that we pull on the halyard. Well, of course, the wind is not cooperating. If we pull on the halyard, that tends to flatten the front part of the main and move the draft further back. So for right now, we don't want it very tight, and it isn't. There's hardly any tension at all. It's just sort of holding it in place. And about the same thing applies to the jib. And if we pull up on it, we can flatten it all together in the slight air. Maybe we even want to slack it just a little for now. Just a little. Now let me set this down here where I can show you. Okay, you can see I've got just a little bit of curvature in the mast, not very much. The important point is to match that curvature to the curve cut in the leading edge of the sail. Also, you'll notice that this is a pretty good position to use for studying the sail position, especially if you've got a little bit of light wind. Gravity helps the sail take up the shape. Not so much in the jib here in this case, but the main gives us a pretty good idea. The final step in tuning is to put the boat in the water and sail it hard on the wind to check the balance. This is the final step because everything else you do to the sails and the rig up until now also affects the balance. So you don't want to, you put it in the water last as the check. So what is this balance? Well, when the wind is pushing the sails, there is a large sideways component to the forces on the sails, and that makes the hull, the boat, try to go sideways through the water. In fact, it does go sideways through the water a little. And if you summed up the resistances at each point on the hull, the fin and the rudder and the hull itself, it would be as though that resistance was acting right here. You can check this by putting the hull with the rudder in the water and at a bathtub, say, and pushing on it, and you'll find if you push right at someplace right around in here, the boat will just go sideways without any tendency to turn. Well, just as there is a center of resistance, a lateral resistance, along the hull, there is a center of effort for the pressures along the sails. And if you added up all the pressures on all the little areas of the sail, it would be as though they were acting right about here, say. We call that the center of effort. And notice that I've put it just a little bit aft of the center of resistance. Now we have a force pushing this way here and a force resisting it that way, and that tends to turn the bow this way into the wind. That's what we mean by weather helm, and weather helm is generally considered to be desirable, a small amount. In medium air, you'd like to be able to sail 3 or 4 yards maybe without needing to do anything to the rudder. That's roughly speaking the right amount of windward helm. About every 3 or 4 yards you have to bump it away from the wind again. Now if a gust hits, it will turn more definitely into the wind. That's for a number of reasons, including some stuff to do with the way the boat heels, which is not what we're talking about here. But still, it's desirable to have a slight amount of weather helm. So suppose that you try it on the 2 tacks and its behavior is different on the 2 tacks. Well, that means the rudder is not balanced properly. So first, trim the rudder so that the sails behave the same on the 2 tacks. Oh, I say it's in the rudder. That's assuming that your rig is symmetrical, that the mast is vertical, the sails work the same one way as the other. If that's the case, and you certainly want that, if that's the case, then the problem is in the rudder. Adjust the rudder until the behavior is the same on both tacks, and then check to see, do you have a small amount of windward helm? If you do not, then you need to move the sails further aft. And there are 2 ways to do that, at least on some boats. You may have an adjustable step on the foredeck, in which case you can move the entire mast aft. Nearly everyone has the capability to rake the mast aft, or to rake it forward, whichever. And you do that by changing adjusting the length of the jib stay and the back stay. And then having done that, you then have to rework your sheeting angles Then you put it in a pond and try again. And after each round of tuning, in which if you change the way the draft in the main, or the twist in the main, or the slot, or the twist, the draft in the jib, any of these things, that will also affect the balance. So the final step in each round of tuning is to put it in the water, get hard on the wind, and check for a slight amount of windward helm.
Okay, so when you get to the lake on a morning of any kind, first thing you want to do is set your boat up for that day on the lake as it is when you get there. And some days you get here and there's no wind, and then it gets to be more, but you set it up every day for whatever wind there is when you start. And today, if you look around very much, you'll find there's just almost no wind. So we're going to set the boat up to sail as if there's 0 to 5, which is kind of what we're looking for today. Tuning a boat is kind of a system, and everybody does it kind of their own way, but here's what I would do as a system. Always when I go home, so that I don't inadvertently change the shape of my sails by leaving them tensioned in the garage or in the trunk, I always slack the downhaul, which is the line that pulls the sail down the mast. I slack the downhaul on the main, and I slack the downhaul on the jib when I leave the lake. So when I come back first thing in the morning, one of the first things I might do is just go ahead and put that downhaul back in there so I don't forget to do it. And I want to pull that just tight enough so that there is not a vertical wrinkle down the mast, and I think that's about that. Also, you can see there's sometimes little scallops in between where the sails turn into the mast. I take out just enough tension to make those scallops go away. And I would do the same thing on the downhaul on the jib. The next thing that I might check is to see if I have my mast raked forward or aft. If I think it's going to be a really light wind day, I might rake my mast a little bit more aft, so that, I believe that's correct, aft, so that the boat will come up into the wind just the slowest little bit when I get a puff. And that's kind of an optimum tuning target for me. When I sail the boat, if the boat slowly comes up into the wind, then it's tuned about right. If it turns sharply into the wind, not so good. Okay. So I'm going to lean my mast forward or backward depending on the wind, aft when the wind is not blowing very hard, forward when it's blowing more hard to keep it from rounding up too sharply. I could tell you why that's the case, but it takes too long. Trust me, that's the right way to do. If you don't know where things belong on your boat, and many of us don't, I strongly recommend that you get the tuning guide from the Victoria Association written by Rake. It gives you an excellent place to start tuning your boat, and it gives you little measurements that you can use to get your mast more or less in the right place and your sail power adjustments more or less in the right place. So because this is going to be a light wind day, I'm going to set up my backstay so it has almost no tension. This is no tension. You see that? It's just fluttery. It doesn't have any pull at all. So I typically set it up so it has just a little bit of tension. When you set your backstay up loosely, it lets your forestay have a curve in it when the wind blows on it, and it gives your sail a little bit more power. So for light wind, I usually set my backstay almost floppy, just about as loose as I can without everything just rattling around completely loose. The next thing that you would do is to set the curvature of your sail, called the draft, to be a specific distance away from the center of the boom till the middle of the sail. I frequently see people, when they're trying to tune their boats, push on the middle of their sail and measure that. Your sail will never look like that in the water. And when they talk about it being an inch, they talk about, with the wind in the sail as it is today, that the distance between the center of the boom and just touching the sail is an inch or so. Don't hold me to these numbers, so I'm not looking at a tuning guide, but that's about it. On the head sail, I will adjust the outhaul on that so that it has about 3/4 of an inch of draft. And that will get us about the right shape for the sails in light air. Finally, you need to know how far your boom is from the center line, and a point of measurement that I frequently use, there is a little hard corner as the deck comes and then goes down to the transom. Right at that hard corner is where I usually target my main boom in moderate to light air. I target my jib boom to be just inside the shrouds right here. Oh, I'd say maybe about this far inside the shrouds. That's the place where I kind of start and see how things are going to work. At this point, I have got the mast forward or aft where I think it belongs. I have got the downhaul pulled so the scallops are out of here and there's no vertical wrinkle. The same with the jib. I have the outhaul on the main pulled taut, so I have about an inch of draft in this sail. And on the jib I have about 3/4 of an inch. I have the main boom going right over that little corner as the deck slopes down to the transom. And I have the jib about this far inside the shrouds. That gives me a pretty fair basic place to start seeing what is going on. Once I have these major adjustments made, the next thing I do is put the boat in the water and hope, if it's calm enough, I give the boat a sharp push away from the launch point. And I watch that boat carefully, because sometimes your rudder will get moved a little bit one way or another, and your boat will, you can't adjust the tuning if your rudder isn't straight. So if your boat sails a straight line, good for you. If your boat curves one way or another, you go to your transmitter and you adjust the transmitter trim right or left until the boat is going away from you in a straight line. So now you've accomplished your basic get started tuning. When you put the boat in the water, the next thing you do is find some wind if there is any, and you sail it to windward and let go of your controls. Trim your sail all the way in, let go of the controls, and see if the boat slowly makes its way into the wind. If it does, you got it right the first time. If it doesn't, and you want it to turn into the wind more, you would move the sail further backward. That is, you would tilt the mast further aft. If you want it to go not into the wind as sharply, you tilt the mast forward, and the boat would then tend to more sail in a straight line or even off to leeward, which is not what you want to do. So don't do that. But if it does that, you'll need to bring the mast a little further aft. You have the backstay tension about right, so you've gone over the boat systematically and adjusted every control to optimize the shape of the sail. There's one last control I would suggest if you have a radio which will allow this. There is the ability to set a switch on your boat which will let you trim the sail slightly outboard. You probably can't see that movement, but it goes out a few degrees. On a digital radio, you can make it any number of degrees you want to. This is what you could call your power setting. When you're starting the race, you're going over the starting line, put it in power mode and sail fast for a while, and as long as there's no one right beneath your boat. And then once you get your boat moving well, you can trim it back into cruise position, and away you go, going as fast as you can go. The one thing that I did not mention, and let me turn the boat a little bit, one of the things that's important is to have the curve of the leech appropriate. If you put too much tension on this device here called a boom bang, you can cause the leech of that sail to be perfectly straight or even turned into the wind like this. That's bad. You want to have that sail have a small amount of curve, because the wind direction on the water and the wind direction at the masthead is slightly different. So to have the sail catch the wind appropriately as the wind is up off the water, you need some curve in the leech. And this is probably, my best guess is, probably about right for a leech curve. It might be a little loose, but not bad. That will also, when you're going downwind like so, it will also not allow this to sag off too much and too much air to blow out of your sail. So it keeps it kind of taut when you're going downwind and has the right amount of curve when you're going upwind, like so. I think I have just taught you everything that I know about tuning a sailboat. If anybody knows some things they could add to that, I would encourage it, and I hope they tell me, so maybe I could do better.